Hello and welcome to the Sales Management Association's presentation today. Our session will start in just a few moments. I have just a few very minor announcements first. Please note that we will not open attendees' audio and video lines for Q&A during the Q&A portion of our presentation. However, we very much welcome your questions and comments. You may submit these by typing them into the chat window that you'll see to the right of the video display on the screen. Also, as a reminder, we'll record today's session. We'll make it available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library, and our members will also have the opportunity to download slides from today's session in the resource library. Today's session is one in a series of web-based Sales Management Association presentations that feature practitioners and thought leaders in the field of Salesforce effectiveness. The Sales Management Association is a professional association for sales operations, commercial effectiveness, and sales management. If you're joining us for the first time, we would like to welcome you and also encourage you to stop by our website at salesmanagement.org. You'll find lots of content there, case studies, research, like the research we'll cover today, training, peer networking, and professional development resources. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association founder and chairman. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Rob Blome to help me present findings from the research that we'll unveil today. I'd like to briefly introduce Rob Blome. Rob is the Senior Vice President of Sales and Alliances at Open Symmetry, an independent management consulting firm focused in sales performance management. With over 15 years of experience in sales effectiveness, performance management, and technology, Rob has managed consulting projects for Fortune 100 companies across a variety of industries. His focus at Open Symmetry is on driving the sales organization to reach the company's growth goals and while remaining committed to the success of the firm's clients. So we're very pleased to have Rob Blome with us today. Welcome, Rob. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Bob. Good to be here.
Terrific. Well, let's talk a little bit about our session today. Let's see. Now, I'll just remind our audience how we typically do these sessions. This is research that we've recently concluded. We've yet to publish a report on the research. So we'll spend our time today really providing the first look at data. We spent a little bit of time analyzing this, and we have some initial conclusions, and then we're looking forward to sharing much more detail in the published report with you. So the way I typically like to do this is I'll sort of be play-by-play. I'll kind of describe what we've found, and I will present the basics of the data, and then I've invited Rob to help us really interpret those findings and help give a practitioner's perspective on really what to make of what we've learned so far with the research. So let's review our agenda today. We're going to give you a little bit of background on this research initiative. We'll also give you some considerations we think are important in how you interpret and make use of the data we share today. Our findings are organized around implementation, SPM's capabilities, the ongoing management of SPM platforms, and the ROI and business impact of SPM applications. We'll save some time for your questions, and we hope that you'll give us any questions or comments in the comments. We'll try to keep a close eye on those. So we'll get started. Rob, any opening thoughts, or should we dive right in?
No, let's let it rip, Bob. Let's get after it.
All right, so let's go. Let's just talk a little bit about the nature of this research initiative. It's a little bit different than our typical research in that we don't plan on closing this initiative. In fact, we expect to report back to you at least once a year on findings related to these important applications: sales performance management applications and incentive compensation management applications. We use those two terms kind of synonymously as they've, I suppose, been used by the vendors themselves. But our shorthand is probably to say simply SPM. You'll hear us use those initials to describe both kinds of applications, I guess. So the data we'll present today was collected in the first half of the year. As I say, we'll continue to leave the survey open and expect to read out to you at least once annually. The focus of the research is really on these platforms' capabilities, their effectiveness, what users have to say about the impact they've had on their business, including things like ROI. And additionally, we had a focus on Big Five applications, that is, the 5 largest and most important providers of SPM software. And we'll give you more insight into that. Our respondents were fairly diverse in both their size and industry makeup. Roughly half of the respondents were either in technology or in health or life sciences related field. The participants also skewed toward medium-sized and larger firms. 75% had at least 50 payees on their system, and roughly half had at least 250 payees. So here's some considerations we think are important in evaluating what we'll present to you today. First, we have a relatively small sample size to date. It's about 150 participants so far. So given its size, our the sort of implied market share of the participants, especially the Big Five, may not accurately reflect the market. That is, our sample size may be skewed toward one or more SPM providers. I'd also point out that we don't have a commercial relationship with any of the firms that we're researching in this research. I suppose that makes this research unique in comparison with other so-called research that is marketed by firms who have conflicting and troublesome sort of relationships with the firms that they're covering. So we can say to you that we accepted $0 from any firms. Similarly, we've not taken any direction from any of the firms that we've researched. They've not, for example, given us specific customers to include in the research. So we think that makes the research uniquely objective. We do have an underwriter for the research. That's Open Symmetry. Open Symmetry is one of the association's underwriters. They are an interested party. I'll let Rob kind of speak to the role Open Symmetry plays, but we want to be quite transparent in their role in the research. In fact, I'll let you speak to that briefly if you'd like, Rob.
Yeah, sure, Bob. So folks, if you're not familiar with Open Symmetry, we're an independent consulting firm. We do quite a bit of work with clients on selection and implementation of these applications. And while we do have practices around some of the applications that you see on the screen, such as SAP, Exactly, Oracle, and Vericent, we are by no means sort of pushing or representing any of these applications, singularly. And as our role in the space, as we see our role in the space as thought leaders, we like to get involved in surveys, research, and data initiatives such as this. So this is, if you will, an extension of what we're interested in helping provide clients and folks as it relates to what we're seeing in the market today. So hopefully that makes sense.
Good. Thank you, Rob. We'll press on. Let's talk now about basic usage statistics that we learned about the respondents in the research. So we learned that 59% of them are users of one of these Big Five packages. So the Big Five, just to refresh your memory if you don't remember the logos on the preceding slide, are Exactly, SAP, formerly Calidus Cloud, Vericent, formerly IBM, and before that, formerly Vericent, but now Vericent again, Oracle, and Optimize, also known as Synergy sometimes. So those are the 5, and they in total represent 59% of all the respondents in the survey. Now the other people in the survey, you might be curious, what are they doing? Well, 21% of them use spreadsheets and databases predominantly to do SPM. Another 12% have solutions that were developed in-house or run on a mainframe. 6% use a different commercial SPM package. And then 1% of our sample actually outsourced SPM services to a third party. So then among the 59% of respondents that do use a Big Five, 34% used Exactly, 25% are on SAP, 20% on Vericent, 15% Oracle, and 7% Optimize. So it's important to look at firm size when considering, who the players are. We found that 43% of the Exactly users in our survey are, 43% of the Exactly users are small companies. So they are companies with 50 or fewer payees. And then more than half of the firms using SAP, Optimize, and Vericent have at least 1,000 payees on their incentive comp program. Rob, maybe you can help here. Is it fair to say then that Exactly really has kind of a commanding share, small business, and then these other firms divide the share of the more enterprise, and then in between it's a bit of a free for all?
Yeah, no, it's I think the slide is a little misleading on where you find the vendors, selling into. And although I would say the Optimize and Vericent SAP graphs are fairly representative of where we might find them focused in the market, right? So you think of mid-sized to larger organizations. By no means would you expect the same from Oracle and Exactly. In fact, I would argue that they're probably just as apt to focus on the mid-size and large application or large clients as well. I think the one thing that is a little bit of a misread here when I saw this information is that Exactly has a disproportionately large number of clients that are less than 250, even less than 50. And I think that speaks to a couple of the applications that they brought to market over the years. They have two applications which they brought to market specifically for the smaller companies. And one of them was Express, which I believe has been sunsetted, and another one is called SimplyComp. So if you can imagine that, if Exactly per se was focused very specifically on those markets and they had applications, you might see a greater response rate from the smaller companies. So I think that maybe explain a little bit of why we're seeing a higher representation of smaller payee counts on the Exactly side. So, for what it's worth, I think that's definitely worth understanding.
Great, thank you. So it seems, you might think one of the great advantages of using SPM software is that it eliminates the need to use so many spreadsheets. In fact, we found it doesn't really eliminate that. It does diminish it. 69% of all the firms that are using spreadsheets, so 69% of all firms use spreadsheets, whether or not they have an SPM. We found that 64% of the firms of the Big Five SPM use spreadsheets, and then those that aren't using a Big Five, 79% use spreadsheets as kind of an integral part of their SPM management efforts. So I don't know, Rob, is good news or bad news on this?
I wouldn't take it either way. One of the things that we've seen over the years of doing these types of surveys, and even Bob, if you remember digging into the content or the details, what we saw is with Big Five clients of the Big Five vendors, we did see them use the Big Five applications for core SPM capabilities, right? So loading data, calculating, and producing reports. But we also saw a utilization of the spreadsheets for other facets of their SPM needs. So if you can think about doing forecasting and analysis or managing or preparing quotas and territories, a lot of that type of work based on the survey data is being done in Excel. And then my assumption would be that it's loaded into the SPM application. So it tells us one thing that you might be able to conclude from that is that clients have not yet adopted the technologies for forecasting, territory, and management that these applications are providing to them. So whether it's the applications don't yet meet their needs or they just are slow to adopt, I think it can be one of the things that maybe would provide a little bit of analysis. but it also points to the idea that if you're going through a selection process as a client, that might be one of the areas that you spend a little bit more time, getting involved in, is to make sure that, whatever application you do pick or select does kind of check the box, right, on all these other areas that are now, based on our research, being used by Excel.
Yeah, it's, I guess, worth pointing out the history of these apps. They started really in the incentive compensation management space, right, and then expanded to do more. That was the push to develop into sales performance management. So, the center of gravity and the core capability of these apps really has to do with incentive comp administration, and it seems that their capabilities are thin when they get beyond those core aspects. So whether or not that's because of slow adoption or just an offering that's not as mature in those areas, we see that the capabilities really seem to fall off once you get outside the core ICM capabilities. Fair to say, or is that?
Yeah, I think there's a combination. I think some of the vendors have varying capabilities and aptitudes as it relates to these peripheral functions around the core ICM. But yeah, it's absolutely worth exploring, because they interpret those functional needs differently between the vendors. And again, I'll say that if you're going through this process, if you're looking at these applications, spending a bit more time on that type of capability will offer you at least the right expectation with whether you're going to continue to use a spreadsheet, or you will be able to transition over to one of the application's capabilities.
Yeah, good advice. Now let's go on now to a look at the satisfaction of our respondents in the implementations of their SPM packages. Again, we're focusing here on the Big Five portion of our sample. So let's look first at three areas. We looked at the time it took to implement SPM, the performance to the planned budget for SPM, and then an overall measure of satisfaction. Some interesting differences here. We found that 60% of firms are satisfied with the time it took. 40% say it was slower than expected to implement. About 75% say that the package came in on or under budget. That's good. And then overall, it looks like 63% are satisfied. Another 18%, another 20% somewhat satisfied with the overall implementation of SPM. Surprised here, Rob?
No, not so much, Bob. I mean, we've been tracking these types of this type of analysis, or I guess these types of responses across implementation for a number of years. And I would offer that over the years we have seen I guess better outcomes, right, from an implementation standpoint. And I think that speaks to these vendors having more easily deployable solutions, if that's a term I should use. But when you talk about where these applications were even 5-6 years ago versus where they are to now, there's better functionality, there's better capabilities. They put more focus on making the application more user friendly for the administrators. And so what that in turn I think has done is made the implementation a little bit cleaner and easier to manage. So yeah, absolutely, it's good to see. It continues to get better over time. And I think if you put this up against just general software deployments, these are much better the numbers than you would see on average. So net, I would say it's a positive and it's going in the right direction.
That's a great point. We do some research on CRM applications and implementations, and they probably kill for these numbers. So it's good to keep that in perspective. Let's look also at something that I know you'll be interested in, the relationship in satisfaction in these three areas and the type of implementation that occurred. So was it led by the vendor themselves, or was it a implementation done by a third party, by a firm such as OpenSymmetry, for example? And here's some interesting things we found out, that there these third-party applications are these implementations that are conducted by a third party, they're slightly more likely to be late and over budget, but they're much more likely to have an overall result that is substantially better in the eyes of the user. So how are you pulling this off, Rob? How is it that you're more likely, at least within,
it's going to cost more. Yeah, it's going to cost more. It's going to
Yeah.
take longer, but you're going to be happier.
Yes.
Yeah. So just for some additional context for folks on the phone. So oftentimes when you get through a vendor selection, you have a couple of choices for the implementation. All the vendors do provide their own professional services organizations. In fact, there is one vendor, Optimize, that doesn't have a partner ecosystem, so you're committed to using the vendor's professional services group. Everybody else in the space does have some sort of partner ecosystem, and so it allows you the opportunity to engage, someone other than the vendor on getting this project deployed and completed. Now, as it relates to those two choices, and I know this is a bit of a generalization, and I apologize to the vendors for this, but with the vendors, you oftentimes will see more of a vanilla approach to getting the implementation done. They'll sit down and they'll look at your comp plans, your reports, and your data feeds, and they'll hopefully, as evidence in the survey data, do a good job in getting those things set up on time and on budget. However, if you sit down with a third-party implementer, OS is a great example, oftentimes we will bring more capabilities to bear, such as testing, business process change management, more advanced training, things like that. And what tends to happen is that if you approach the engagement in a more holistic manner, and you do more work upfront to define that future state, and then you start aligning these types of services and capabilities and bring them into the project, what you will get is an extension of the time and often an increase in budget. But what happens when you do go live is often a much higher satisfaction in that, hey, our people are trained, we have good processes, and this is aligning with where we want to take the program into the future. Again, I'm not picking on the vendors, as much as I should be or shouldn't be, but that would probably be a general kind of view of the data, or I guess an interpretation of what I'm seeing in the data. In that, hey, if you go a vanilla pace, yep, on time, on budget. If you go with a third party, they're going to push your boundaries a little bit and may push the timeline and cost, but hopefully at the end of the day, you get a better result.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. It's very interesting. So let's press ahead. Let's look now at satisfaction, not with implementation, but with the capabilities of these platforms themselves. And we'll look first at, I guess, 7 areas that include the core capabilities of incentive compensation management, as well as some of the higher order things, related to sales performance management. And we see that the things that users are most satisfied with are the calculation and crediting capabilities of the packages, and then things they're less satisfied with include analytics, reporting, and forecasting. With analytics, just really half are satisfied with the capabilities of these packages in that area. So in my mind, Rob, this bears out kind of, I guess, my theory about, these firms haven't really perhaps evolved as far from incentive compensation management capabilities as they might have us believe, but you might have a more tempered perspective on that.
Yeah, no, so Bob, I definitely think the capabilities are there when it comes to reporting and analytics. There is some differences between the applications, right? I mean, some of these is into their product. Some are proprietarily built, but at the end of the day, if you're looking at these applications to provide better transparency, better reports, execute on a business intelligence strategy, the functional capability is there, and it is there across most of these applications. I think the reason we're seeing this drop off, and we can talk about it a little bit on the next page, I believe, is just the ability of clients to understand what it is that they actually need to see from these systems on a go-forward basis, and then maintain that functional capability in an ongoing manner. But yeah, it is. I would offer a little disheartening to see analytics or reporting at the bottom of the satisfaction curve. You know, those things are what these vendors really sell to, and why I think a lot of people look to these applications, because, you know, Excel and some of these other applications and homegrown stuff, they just don't have the reporting and BI capabilities. And since you put this slide up, I'll kind of continue a bit here, Bob. But
please,
is that okay?
Yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah.
So I think it's interesting, right? So what we did for the folks on the phone, what we did is we actually looked at the satisfaction around analytics for those people that are on Excel or, you know, another application versus those people that are on an SPM application or the Big Five. And what we find is that people are less satisfied, if you will, with analytics when they're on one of the Big Five platforms, or they didn't have their expectations met, versus 56% of the people polled that aren't on the Big Five. I'm sorry, the people that were polled on not on the Big Five said, you know, they were more happy. So two things I think we can interpret from that data. One is plainly that you have different expectations for analytics or reporting if you're on one of these systems and you've gone through a sales cycle and you've seen what they have to offer, right? So you may have much higher expectations for their capabilities than you would if you weren't on them. So if, you know, the comparison here is in Excel. So that might be one reason why we're seeing that disparity, is just simply based on expectations. Now, why we have a low output, right? So why did we see analytics and reporting on the last page very low? Why do we see only 52% satisfied? Well, I touched on it a little bit, but there's poor planning, right? There's really the inability for clients to sit down, truly understand what these packages have to offer, and take advantage of it. So without that planning, you know, you're not necessarily going to be completely satisfied. There is the issue around vendor capabilities. Each of these platforms, as I mentioned, have different capabilities when it comes to analytics, reporting, dashboards, and things like that. So you need to understand that, you know, if you're the vendor of choice or the one you're going down the path with doesn't meet your needs, set the expectation correctly around the analytics. The third bullet is around system configuration. And so, having been in the space for a while, I can honestly tell you that if you don't think about what reports and analytical dashboards you want when it comes time to go live up front, you may actually not set your configuration up correctly to support those reports. And so an example of that might be you sit down and you start to configure your crediting rules and your comp plan rules, and you've got that all set up to work very cleanly and efficiently inside the system. However, when it comes time to set up your analytics dashboard, if you didn't set up the credit rules or the comp plans in a specific way, you may not actually have that data available from an analytics or a reporting standpoint. So that's kind of what I mean to say when system configuration. In-house expertise, it just talks to the fact that if you're going through this implementation, if you don't bring somebody up to speed on how to maintain these reports and analytics over time, it tends to degrade, it tends to lose its value. And, you know, it is one of the things I think drives that satisfaction. And then that last piece is just less complex requirements. I think, you know, kind of talks to the configuration, it talks to the BI planning, but it really sort of is in the requirements phase or the analysis phase of your implementation. If you don't pull all that data together, you might suffer on the analytics side later. So a little bit of a long-winded talk track there, Bob, but I am disappointed that we're not seeing better satisfaction on reporting analytics. But again, it may call out the need to be more careful when you go through that implementation or you go through that selection effort.
Well, it's interesting, your perspective. I mean, it really is very helpful because it's easy, without having a really in-depth understanding of these applications, it's easy to assume that they don't have these capabilities. Your argument is, in fact, they very much do have them. When they're lost on users, it's in the configuration and planning and implementation phase. And I have a question for you, Rob. Is it, you know, in part due to the fact that the people who tend to purchase and be most involved in the implementation of these SPM packages are much more comfortable and aware of the issues related to the incentive comp calculations and the pay administration issues, and they're on much less firm ground when it comes to the reporting and analytics that might be required by sales leadership. Could that have something to do with it, or not?
So within one of the surveys we did previously, when we talk about ownership of the application, in general, ownership of SPM or sales commissions processing falls in one or two buckets. Either falls in finance or it tends to fall in sales operations. So what you're sort of speaking to in being comfortable with calculations, paying people, and doing all that stuff correctly and accurately, we see those as prominent attributes for the finance team, right? So they're often very good at making sure the account plans are correct, that people are getting paid timely and things like that. When the ownership of SPM processes shifts over to sales operations, you tend to see a maybe more emphasis on reporting, analytics, delivering data to managers, executives, and payees. So, you could argue very much so that, hey, if the SPM implementation is being run by the finance team and they're not in tune with the reporting analytics needs as much as they should be, you would see a fall off in the satisfaction or the overall satisfaction of the deployment. If it's in sales ops, they tend to take more time saying, hey, here's the reports we need to show them, here's the additional reports we'd like to build for them, and things like that. So that, it contributes, if you will, but I wouldn't say it's the main driver.
Gotcha.
But to clarify, the ownership being split pretty evenly between sales ops and finance, if the survey, my memory works, it's about a 40% split between those two groups, and the remainder of the ownership usually sits with HR, IT, and sometimes, believe it or not, marketing.
Okay, good. All right, well, let's move on. Let's talk about the satisfaction. We've talked about satisfaction with the implementation, with the capabilities of these packages. Now let's talk about how satisfied users are in the ongoing management of SPM. So I'll put back a chart that you'll remember. It showed the satisfaction with these various capabilities. Let's see what happens when we overlay on top of this the satisfaction with ongoing management. And we can see here that with a few exceptions, at least when it comes to the things that are rated as the most capable features of SPM, there is a bit of a decline in satisfaction in the difficulty of ongoing management of those features. So what explains this drop off? Rob Blum, can you help us understand this?
Yeah, so for me, the quick takeaway, or the thing that sort of is glaring to me, is companies not spending enough time on training or knowledge transfer and adoption of these applications. The vendors have moved over the last few years to providing online training courses, right? So videos, if you will, where you get orientated to the application and how it should function. Where we tend to see the biggest issues is when clients take that as their only training route, right? When they don't look at the knowledge transfer process as a more formal engagement. And so I think what we're seeing here is a lot of people saying, hey, very happy with the capabilities. We have above board marks for most of the areas that you'd want to see. And then it drops off, right? So after you've gone live, now we have a drop off in our satisfaction. And that in that satisfaction, without knowing more, I would point to not understanding and how to maintain that application and keep it on par with how it was originally deployed. So the takeaway for me and for anybody on the phone that is considering one of these applications is take a bit more time thinking about your business process change management approach, who's going to be owning these processes, and then make sure you have a very comprehensive approach to getting these people trained. There's a number of ways you can do this outside of the online courses that the vendors offer, such as custom training on site, OJT, mentorships, any number of kind of vehicles to get that done. But again, to me and to anybody looking at this slide, it would sort of represent that, hey, the capability is obviously there. How do we make sure that we're happy with that functional area on an ongoing basis?
Let's not overlook the few bright spots that we have on this chart, which relate to workflow and to reporting, which we spend a lot of time talking about. So it would appear that once you invest the time in front, configuring and speccing what you need in those areas, the ongoing management seems to be there's no drop off in satisfaction.
Yeah, but you'd still rather see it on par or even better, right? So
indeed, yeah.
You'd want to see clients happy about having the application, or happier about having the application once it's up, than just initially seeing the capabilities. It's the opportunity for the vendors to over deliver, and I think we're missing that in the space.
Gotcha. Well, on the topic of delivering, let's look at really perhaps the most important thing with these applications, and the satisfaction of users related to the return on investment and the business impact of these packages. So before we jump in, I'll just remind our audience that if you have a question or comment, feel free to include that in chat. We'll do our best to get to those shortly. So what did we learn about ROI? I mean, the news here is pretty good, it seems to me. 75% of users in our study that are using big 5 firms have satisfaction with the ROI. In fact, 37% say that it's better than acceptable. 37% say it's acceptable. So this is a pretty good result. I'm assuming it is. Or what's your take on this, Rob?
No, it's good. It's positive. It's actually gotten better over time. Very similar to deployment satisfaction. The ROIs have been improving. I think people are getting more of a clear picture on what the value is that they're going to get from these applications. I think the burden of building a business case for adopting these types of technologies is there. And I've been part of some post-deployment business case reviews, and almost in every situation, we not only saw clients receive the ROI they were looking for, but there were also additional areas where they got more bang for the buck. And I think that actually leads to the next slide a bit. But
sure.
Sorry to get ahead.
I'll just point out here, and we'll make this point more vigorously later, that there are substantial differences across vendors when it comes to these ratings of ROI. So this is both dependent on the context of the implementation, but seems to be highly dependent on the vendor itself. Let's look at the business impact, as you suggested. We looked at 9 areas, I believe, and specific expectations that users of these packages had. For example, their ability to make payments more accurate, or to impact the effectiveness of sales reports or management reports. And we found that overall, about 2/3 or more of all users said their requirements and expectations were met in the impact of SPM on the business. So at the very low end are improved management reports and launching incentive comp plans faster. Just 65% and 68% of users said that those impacts occurred. But on the high end, fully 87% of users say that payments are more accurate because of the impact of SPM. This might go a very long way to explaining the high ROI numbers, but again, these seem like they're pretty good results.
Yeah, no, they're very good results, Bob. And I think at the top of the chart, you would expect to see those sort of business impacts, right? I mean, a lot of companies are looking at these applications as a way to get more accurate payments out the door, be able to stand up to any audits and the Sarbanes-Oxley stuff. I think where it really sort of was interesting to look at is the correlations on reporting, right? I mean, you'd think improved reporting would be something that we would see as a more significant business impact. However, we're not. It's not up there where it should be. But what's up there, which is good to see, is better transparency, reduced shadow accounting, things like that. So it's kind of funny that with reports, you would expect those things to hit, but still reports are getting dinged, I think, against some of the other ones. I think the faster plan launches, Bob, if I were to kind of relate that back to the satisfaction with ongoing management, the correlation for me is that if you've got a poor satisfaction with your application, that probably goes off of not understanding how to properly manage it or keep it up to speed. And so if you're stuck in that sort of frame set, getting plans out the door more quickly is going to be a challenge, because if you don't understand the application, if you're not super jazzed that you've got it, well, deploying new plans can be tougher. That said, obviously putting out new plans, they have to be configured, they have to be tested, and then they have to be migrated. But these applications do tout the ability to automate much of that and make it easier. So anyway, those were sort of my takeaways when I looked at the data.
Good. Well, let's try to wrap up. We'll get to a few questions as well. And so we do have some summary observations here that are important, both in terms of interpreting what we've covered and understanding what you can do to get additional information on this topic if this is an area of interest for you. So first, let's point out a few things just in summary of the content we've covered today. For SPM, overall satisfaction is pretty high, especially among the big five. At 63% of firms are satisfied overall with the quality of their implementation. We see that third-party implementations have a pretty significantly higher overall level of satisfaction in comparison with those implementations that are led by vendors themselves. So the big five SPM platform capabilities appear strongest in those things that are most closely related to incentive compensation management. And they appear weakest as reflected by user satisfaction results in the areas of reporting, forecasting, and analytics. Nevertheless, 75% of users of Big Five SPM report acceptable or better ROI, and at least 2/3 of all users overall of Big Five SPM report favorable outcomes in satisfaction related to our business impact categories that we asked about. Leading the way with those is improvement in payment accuracy. 87% indicate they're satisfied with that. Improved auditing capabilities, 83%, and the improved ability to make and track pay adjustments, which can get quite complicated. So let's also talk about some additional detail. We can tell you there are substantial differences in the vendor ratings from vendor to vendor in the research, and we'll look forward to sharing those differences with you in the detailed reports. These differences are most apparent, or here's a point I plan to make delicately, but I'll perhaps be recklessly candid instead. So the differences were pretty stark between vendors, and we found them much more apparent than in other research that we've seen. And we're left to conclude that the commercial conflicts that exist in those other research organizations may have influenced those outcomes. So there's that. Also, we see correlations in the capabilities of these SPM platforms as rated, and the success of the implementation, and the satisfaction with ongoing management. So figuring out what's most important to spec and the capabilities of the packages you're purchasing seems to be very important. And also the differences in vendors seem to increase as you get more payees. So those packages and implementations focused on large firms tend to sort out differences in vendors in a more apparent way than in the small firms. Anything you'd add on this, Rob?
Yeah, the second to last bullet, the correlations on capabilities, success on implementation and management. I tend to wonder, given we did have a smaller sample size, Bob, that if you get clients that aren't super excited about the application in general, they may score consistently lower across capabilities and ongoing satisfaction. So, I think there's a little bit of a grain of salt to look at there. but you're dead right. I mean, it was pretty apparent to us that we saw differences between the vendors in overall satisfaction, as well as a correlation between those components. On the payees, on the last bullet specifically, increased number of payees provided more differences between the vendors. I think that should go without saying, or it should be expected, right? Because as you get into larger organizations, there's more complexity, there's more challenges. There's usually a lot more plans. There's more developed and robust, sophisticated reports and analytics are going to be needed. And so, if you were to sit and just look at the data across the larger payee counts, as you noted, we are seeing differences between the vendors, and I think that's a tell on which vendors are probably going to be more apt to satisfy a larger client's needs than maybe a little bit less sophisticated, smaller payee count client. So I think maybe people are drawing those conclusions already, but that's some stuff that jumped out to me.
Indeed. Okay, good. Well, let's move ahead. A few next steps that our listeners might be interested in. First of all, we'll have the survey brief available to distribute on July 27th. That's on Monday. You may request this from Open Symmetry at any time. You could, also, if you're a full member of the Sales Management Association, this will be available to you on our website. So this will include much of the detail that we provided today, summarized findings about the capabilities, ongoing management, deployment, and more. Then also on July 27th, we'll have the detailed report. This has the good stuff. This has the information about which vendors are performing and which ones are not. It shows clear winners and losers in the various capability categories that we tracked, and we think is a must read for anyone considering a new application. We are happy to make this available at no cost, but it's not free. You have to participate in the study in order to get the detailed findings. So you'll find a link to the study on our website under Open Research Initiatives on the Sales Management Association's website, or you can just drop us a line. We'll send you a link. It's open to anyone who uses sales performance management in the course of their business operations. It's not open to vendors. Okay, anything else to, oh yeah, Rob, you also have a very generous offer to people who are interested in really not only digging into this detail, but might need and benefit from a little more perspective. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Bob, thanks for letting me kind of put this out there. So folks, if anybody's interested in looking at this detailed research, getting a copy of that detailed report, and spending a little bit of time with myself or one of our senior consultants that runs vendor selections, we're more than happy to walk through that content with you, even to a degree, tailor it so that we can provide better analysis against your organization. So if you fit within a certain industry and a certain payee count, what we can do is we can pull the data together so that we can see benchmarking for your industry, for your payee counts, and hopefully answer any questions you have. So absolutely happy to do that. I love talking about this stuff for whatever reason. So yeah, if there's interest in your and you're wanting to see that detail and get some benchmarking, please feel free to reach out to myself or anybody on my team, and we'll go ahead and coordinate that with you directly. So appreciate it.
Cool. Well, let's see if we've got some questions. I see one in the queue. Let's talk to that one. The questioner asks about sales crediting. They'd like to know, what are the problems that we see in sales crediting, and if you could talk about maybe the differences in that challenge in small and medium-sized businesses compared to larger enterprise firms. This can get quite complicated, right?
Yeah, we could go a number of different places with that.
Yeah.
So I think crediting oftentimes is one of the biggest challenges in the market, especially for the vendors. Smaller companies with lower transaction counts or orders that come through the system generating credits, usually never an issue, right? Never an issue for any of these vendors. It's not until you get to the larger transaction counts and the larger amounts of credits that need to be generated, do you often start to see a stark differentiation between the vendor's capabilities and what the clients actually need to do. it has gotten to the point where some of these vendors have had to essentially beef up their processing, beef up their servers to handle the huge amounts of credits that come in. And I'll give you an example. One of our clients estimates about 1 billion transactions loaded every 6 months, and then generates 60 credits to 80 credits per transaction. And if you can imagine, tens of thousands of payees, now you've got an extremely complex process. And so when you're looking at the crediting and you're trying to define, how are we going to manage that crediting within the context of an application, that if it is complex, if there are high counts, should be first and foremost on your mind when you're looking at these different applications. Now, there is an argument from a management or a management consulting standpoint that you shouldn't be generating that many credits per transaction, for that type of conversation and how to design a comp plan that really aligns with best practices. That's probably another conversation, or at least a reach out to any of the consulting firms that focus on plan design. Anyway, so a little bit of a roundabout answer, Bob.
Good. Well, thank you. Well, we are at the end of our time, so I'm going to cut us off at this point. But Rob, thank you very much for helping us with the research, and also for being with us today to help us interpret the findings. Really appreciate your input and insight. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Bob. I hope everybody on the phone was able to see something valuable in this. And we, as Bob mentioned, the research is going to be evergreen, so we're hopeful that more people will participate and enrich the data set. So thank you again.
Terrific. Well, before we leave, I will remind our audience that our next Sales Management Association presentation will take place on August 6th. We'll host on that day a panel discussion on how organizational culture contributes to sales productivity. You can learn more about this upcoming event and many other events on our website at salesmanagement.org. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Thanks for your time and attention today. Goodbye until next time.